My name is Mary Raygoza. I'm 24 years old, and I never imagined I'd become one of those stories people whisper about, the kind that starts small, almost harmless, and slowly mutates into something that shatters your idea of family. For most of my life, I believed the phrase, family is everything, without questioning it. I thought conflict was temporary, misunderstandings were fixable, and loyalty was automatic. I was wrong about all of it. I grew up in what looked like a perfectly normal suburban household. My parents, Richard and Sandra Raygoza, cared deeply about how we were perceived. Our house was always clean when guests came over. Our family photos carefully curated, our social media filled with smiling faces and celebratory captions. My mother especially took pride in telling people how close we were, how well she'd raised her children, how grateful she was to have such a loving family. On the surface, it was convincing. Underneath it was something else entirely. There were two of us, me and my younger sister, Chloe Raygoza. Chloe is 3 years younger than me, and if you asked anyone outside our family, they'd tell you she was wonderful, smart, charming, effortlessly likable. Teachers adored her, neighbors praised her, and relatives always asked how she was doing before they even remembered to say hello to me. She had a way of making people feel special, of smiling just enough to disarm them. What most people didn't see was how that charm came with precision. Chloe knew exactly when to play innocent and exactly how far she could push without consequences. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the older sister, the example. That was the role assigned to me early, and I wore it without protest. When something went wrong, I was expected to be understanding. When Chloe crossed a line, I was told to let it go. She's younger, my mother would say. Be the bigger person. Over time, I stopped questioning it. I thought that was just how families worked. I studied hard, worked part-time through college, and learned early not to ask for much. Chloe, on the other hand, never had to. New phone done, tuition covered, car handed over with a bow. My parents justified it by saying she deserved it, that she was doing so well that she needed encouragement. I told myself it didn't bother me. I told myself fairness didn't matter as long as we were family. That belief would cost me more than I ever imagined. What my parents didn't advertise, what they barely acknowledged, was how they managed to maintain the lifestyle they were so proud of. The truth was, we weren't wealthy. We were comfortable because someone else made sure we were. That someone was my Uncle David Raygoza, my father's older brother. Uncle David never lived with us, but his presence shaped everything. He owned several businesses, did well for himself, and quietly supported my parents whenever they needed it. Mortgage help, tuition payments, emergency expenses. He never made a show of it, never asked for recognition. He didn't have children of his own, and I think in some ways he saw us as family in the purest sense, something worth protecting. He and I were always close. He was the one who taught me to drive, helped me land my first internship, and spoke to me like an adult long before my parents did. More importantly, he believed in honesty, truly believed in it. He used to tell me money is replaceable. Trust isn't. I didn't realize how deeply that belief would shape everything that followed. Looking back, it's almost laughable that all of this began over something so small, a pair of diamond earrings. At the time, it felt trivial until it wasn't, until it became the excuse my family needed to reveal who they truly were. That weekend, Chloe had come home from college, and the house was its usual performance. My mother cooked as if she were hosting royalty. My father fussed over the Wi-Fi. Everyone played their part. It was comfortable, familiar, and completely fragile. I didn't know it yet, but that comfort was already cracking. And by the end of that night, I would no longer be welcome in the place I once called home. The moment everything shifted, it didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, wrapped in confusion, and delivered with a calm that made it harder to fight. Chloe came downstairs holding a small velvet jewelry box, like it was fragile evidence. Her face was pale lips, slightly parted, eyes glistening, just enough to suggest panic without hysteria. She stopped in the middle of the living room, where all of us could see her, me, my parents, even my father, who had paused mid-complaint about the internet connection. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry, "where are my diamond earrings?" My mother blinked, genuinely confused at first. "The ones your uncle gave you for your birthday." Chloe nodded and opened the box. It was empty. "They were in here," she said softly. "I checked this morning before my shower. Now they're gone." At first, no one reacted. Things went missing in our house all the time: chargers, keys, paperwork. I assumed this would be the same. A brief search, some annoyance, maybe a laugh later when they turned up somewhere obvious. I didn't even look up from my phone. Then Chloe's eyes shifted. They landed on me. "You were in my room earlier, weren't you?" she asked. I frowned and looked up. "Yeah. You asked me to grab your charger." She tilted her head slightly like she was replaying the memory. "Right. And did you notice anything off while you were in there?" Something about her tone made my stomach tighten. "No," I said slowly. "Why?" There was a pause, long enough to be uncomfortable. "Then maybe you saw where they went?" she continued, voice tightening. "Because I didn't move them." I stared at her, confused. "Chloe." "I was in your room for maybe 30 seconds. My mother straightened. "Mary," she said carefully, like she was choosing each word. "Did you take the earrings?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "What? No. Why would I take her earrings?" No one laughed with me. My father crossed his arms. Chloe folded hers across her chest, her expression no longer confused, just wounded. "You've been stressed about money lately," she said quietly. "Didn't you say your rent was late?" The words hit harder than I expected. I had mentioned it in passing weeks ago, a careless comment, a moment of vulnerability, and now it was being sharpened into something else entirely. "That doesn't mean I stole anything," I said, my voice rising. "If you want, search my bag. Search my car. I didn't take them." But Chloe was already moving forward, her voice gaining confidence, as if she'd rehearsed this. She talked about how she saw me linger near her dresser, how I looked nervous when she asked about the charger, how she'd felt uncomfortable but didn't want to accuse me outright. Each sentence landed like a small cut. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to disappointment, the kind that feels worse than anger. "Mary," she said softly, "we've done so much for you. If you were struggling, you could have asked." I didn't take them, I repeated, my heart pounding. My father sighed heavily. "We'll deal with this later. Right now, I think it's best if you leave until we figure things out." Leave. The word echoed in my head as if I'd misheard it. Leave. "You think I stole from my own sister, and your solution is to send me away?" "We need space," my mother said. "For Chloe." I looked at my sister, hoping stupidly that she'd crack, that she'd admit this had gone too far. Instead, she met my eyes with something close to pity. "You should have just told the truth," she said quietly. I didn't argue anymore. There was no point. I packed a small bag with shaking hands while my parents stood in silence. Chloe leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me like she'd already won something. That night, I slept on a friend's couch. My phone buzzed nonstop messages from my parents telling me they were disappointed, telling me I needed to make this right. Chloe sent one too. "It's not too late to apologize." I stared at it for a long time, wondering how someone could lie so easily, so completely, and how quickly my family had chosen to believe her. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Uncle David, and that call would change everything. The first night away from my parents' house felt unreal, like I was borrowing someone else's life. I slept on my friend Ethan's couch, staring at the ceiling while the room hummed softly around me. Every sound felt too loud. Every shadow felt unfamiliar. I kept waiting for my phone to ring with an apology, a realization, anything that would tell me this was all a misunderstanding that would sort itself out by morning. It didn't happen. Instead, my phone buzzed with messages that carried the same hollow tone. "We're disappointed. This isn't like you. You need to take responsibility." Not once did anyone ask me where the earrings really were. Not once did they say they might have been wrong. The silence between those messages said more than the words themselves. They had already decided who I was in this story. Chloe's message was the one that stuck with me the most. It's not too late to apologize, not to explain, not to talk. Apologize. To confess to something I hadn't done. To make her lie complete. I didn't reply. The days blurred together. I showered at Ethan's place, wore the same few clothes on rotation, and tried to act normal while feeling like something fundamental inside me had been ripped out. Ethan never pushed, but he noticed everything. The way I flinched when my phone vibrated. The way I stared at nothing while pretending to scroll. The way I stopped talking mid-sentence like my thoughts had nowhere to land. Meanwhile, life at my parents' house went on without me. I knew because Chloe made sure the world knew. Her social media was suddenly full of smiling photos, dinners with my parents, captions about gratitude and resilience. In one post, she wore a new pair of diamond earrings, larger, brighter than the ones she claimed were stolen. The caption read, "Some things can't be replaced, but I'm learning to move forward." The comments were filled with sympathy. "You're so strong. I can't believe someone would do that to you. Family can be so disappointing." I felt sick reading them, not just because they believed her, but because I realized how carefully she'd curated the narrative. She wasn't just lying to our parents, she was rewriting me for everyone. 2 days after I left, my phone rang with a number I hadn't expected. Uncle David. I almost didn't answer. I was exhausted, emotionally raw, and terrified of what my parents might have told him, but something in me needed to hear a voice that didn't already assume my guilt. "Mary," he said warmly when I picked up. "How are you holding up?" I swallowed. "I'm fine," I said automatically. There was a pause. Not awkward, intentional. "Your mother mentioned there was some sort of incident with Chloe's jewelry," he said carefully. "She said it was a misunderstanding." My chest tightened. I stared at the wall, trying to decide how much of the truth I was allowed to tell. My parents had made it clear they didn't want anyone else involved. But for the first time, their wishes didn't feel like something I owed them. "That's not what it was," I said quietly. David didn't interrupt. He waited. So I told him everything. About the earrings. About how quickly the accusation turned toward me. About being told to leave. About Chloe's certainty and my parents' disappointment. About how no one asked for my side of the story. My voice cracked more than once, and I hated myself for it, but I didn't stop. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, David spoke. His voice was low, controlled. "That doesn't sound like a misunderstanding." I let out a shaky laugh. "No, it doesn't. That sounds like betrayal," he continued. "And I don't say that lightly." Something inside me broke open then, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet collapse of something I'd been holding together with denial. "I keep thinking they'll realize how wrong this is," I admitted, "that they'll call and tell me to come home." "Mary," he said gently, "people don't always choose what's right. Sometimes they choose what's easy." We talked for a long time after that. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't promise to fix anything. He just listened, and that alone felt like oxygen after being underwater. Before we hung up, he said, "If you need anything, I'm here." I thanked him and set my phone down, staring at the ceiling again, but this time something had shifted. I didn't feel lighter exactly, but I felt seen. What I didn't know then was that this call had done more than comfort me. It had planted a seed, one that would quietly grow while my parents convinced themselves everything was fine. They had no idea that the foundation they stood on was already cracking. A few days after my call with Uncle David, my mother texted me again. "Can you come by so we can talk? We need to clear the air." For a moment, my heart betrayed me. Hope flickered, small, cautious, but real. I reread the message 3 times, searching for any hint of apology, any sign that they were ready to admit they'd made a mistake. It wasn't there, but I told myself maybe that part came in person. Maybe they didn't want to put it in writing. Maybe this was the beginning of things being fixed. I told Uncle David about the message. He didn't discourage me, but his response was measured. "Go," he said. "Just don't go in expecting fairness. Pay attention to what they actually say." That should have warned me. When I pulled up to my parents' house, it looked exactly the same. The lawn trimmed, the curtains drawn just so. No sign that anything had fractured inside those walls. Walking up the front steps felt surreal, like I was entering a stage set where everyone had rehearsed their lines without me. My mother opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mary," she said, stepping aside as if I were a guest, not her daughter. A guest. Chloe was already on the couch, scrolling through her phone legs, tucked beneath her, perfectly at ease. She didn't look surprised to see me. She didn't look guilty either. She glanced up, briefly offered a thin smile, then went back to her screen. My father stood near the kitchen, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't greet me at all. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd been accused, where I'd been told to leave. My mother clasped her hands together, inhaled slowly, and said, "We just want to move past all of this. It's been stressful for everyone." Everyone. Not you. Not we're sorry. Everyone. So I said carefully, "Are we done accusing me of stealing?" Her smile faltered just a fraction. "Well, sweetheart, without proof, it's hard to know what really happened. Chloe still feels violated, and we can't just dismiss her feelings." "I didn't take them," I said flatly. My father finally spoke. "Then where are they?" "I don't know," I replied. "Maybe she lost them. Maybe someone else took them. But it wasn't me." Chloe scoffed softly without looking up. "Yeah, because random burglars always break in just to steal one pair of earrings." Every time I tried to explain, my words were redirected, reframed, softened into something that sounded like evasion. My mother interrupted. My father reinterpreted. Chloe played her role perfectly. Eyes glassy voice, trembling at just the right moments. It felt like being trapped in a conversation where the conclusion had already been written. Then my mother said something that snapped the last thread of hope I had left. Your uncle called us, she said casually. He said he was worried about you. I told him you've been dealing with some personal issues, but we're trying to support you. You should be careful what you tell him, Mary. He doesn't need to be dragged into our family problems. That was it. The truth landed fully formed and undeniable. This wasn't about the earrings. It was about control. You don't care whether I'm telling the truth, I said, my voice rising despite my effort to keep it steady. You're scared he'll find out what you're really like. My father's eyes hardened. Watch your tone. No, I said, standing up. I'm done watching my tone. You didn't even ask for my side before throwing me out. And now you want to pretend this is just a misunderstanding. Sit down, my mother hissed. I didn't. I turned to Chloe, who finally looked up at me. You know I didn't take them. For a split second, her mask slipped. Just enough. Her eyes met mine, cold and satisfied. You're right, she said quietly, but they'll never believe you. Before I could react, my mother was already scolding me for intimidating my sister. My father told me to leave until I could act like an adult, so I left, again. This time, there was no shock, only clarity. I drove straight to Ethan's place, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Anger coursing through me like electricity. That night, I called Uncle David and told him everything. Every word, every manipulation, every moment that proved this wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said quietly, "Thank you for telling me. Leave the rest to me." I didn't know what that meant yet. I only knew that something irreversible had just been set in motion, and my parents had no idea what they'd started. Nothing happened right away. That was the strangest part. After that last call with Uncle David, I braced myself for fallout, angry texts from my parents' accusations, maybe even threats. Instead, there was silence. Not the tense, passive-aggressive kind I was used to, but a deep, unsettling quiet, like the calm after something massive had already shifted and no one had noticed yet. For the first time in weeks, my phone didn't buzz with disappointment or guilt. No messages asking me to apologize. No reminders about family loyalty. Just nothing. At first, it felt like relief. I woke up one morning on Ethan's couch and realized my chest wasn't tight. I wasn't replaying arguments in my head before I even opened my eyes. I didn't have to prepare myself for another emotional ambush. For a few precious moments, I let myself believe maybe this was peace. But peace, I learned, can be temporary when it's built on denial. I'd been staying with Ethan for over a month by then. He never complained, never rushed me, but I could feel the strain anyway. The unspoken weight of my presence. The way he'd come home from work and find me still at the kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling job listings with cold coffee beside me. One night, he leaned against the counter and said, half joking, but not really, "You know you can stay as long as you need, but you also deserve your own space again." He was right. I had been stuck emotionally suspended between what my family had done to me and what I was afraid to do next. So the next morning, I woke up early, put on the cleanest clothes I had, and decided to start rebuilding, whether I felt ready or not. I found a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town, peeling paint, a leaky faucet, neighbors who argued late into the night, but it was affordable, and more importantly, it was mine. Signing that lease felt like reclaiming something I'd lost, proof that being thrown out didn't mean I was powerless. I worked nonstop, freelance design jobs, late shifts at a print shop, anything that paid. The days were exhausting, but there was a strange comfort in knowing every bill I paid was because of my own effort. No guilt, no strings, no unspoken debts. Uncle David checked in. Occasionally, never pushing, never prying. "Proud of you," he told me once after I mentioned landing a steady client. "This is how independence feels, hard but honest." While I was rebuilding, my parents were pretending. I knew because Chloe kept posting. Smiling dinners, birthday outings, carefully framed photos that suggested nothing had changed. But there were cracks if you knew how to look. Fewer expensive outings, older clothes recycled into new looks. The confidence in the captions felt forced. Then came the text. "Are you happy now?" It was from Chloe. No context, no explanation, just that. I stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what she meant. Then I checked her social media and saw the post she'd made an hour earlier. A vague announcement about taking a break from school to focus on mental health. That's when it clicked. Uncle David had stopped helping. Quietly, completely. No dramatic confrontation, no warning. The tuition payments stopped. The mortgage assistance vanished. The safety net they'd been standing on for years had simply been pulled away, and without it, their perfect image was starting to buckle. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not the way I expected. What I felt was heavier, a mix of sadness and something like inevitability. This wasn't revenge, it was consequence. I typed out several responses to Chloe's message, angry ones, honest ones, even sympathetic ones. Then I deleted them all. For once, I chose silence. I wasn't going to explain myself to someone who had never explained herself to me. Instead, I poured everything into my work. My client list grew, slowly then steadily. Each completed project felt like a small stitch pulling me back together. I stopped checking my parents' social media, stopped replaying their words, stopped waiting for them to realize what they'd done. And somewhere in that quiet, exhausting routine, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving to earn my family's approval. I was surviving for myself. If rebuilding my life had a rhythm, it was quiet and repetitive. Wake up early, make coffee, answer emails, work until my eyes burned, collapse onto the couch with takeout or something quick I'd thrown together. Repeat. There was nothing cinematic about it, nothing that would look impressive in a montage, but there was something deeply grounding in knowing exactly what my days belonged to. They were mine. No one was watching. No one was judging whether I was doing enough or too much or the right kind of successful. The loneliness still crept in sometimes, usually at night. I'd sit on the floor of my small studio apartment, back against the couch, laptop closed, and let the silence settle. I'd think about how easily I'd been erased from my family's life, how quickly they'd closed ranks without me. It hurt in a way that was hard to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. Being rejected by strangers stings. Being rejected by your own parents changes the way you see yourself. But something else was happening alongside the pain. I was changing. I stopped checking Chloe's social media entirely. At first, it was a conscious effort, like resisting an itch. Then it became automatic. I deleted old message threads, archived photos I couldn't bring myself to erase, and muted every family-related notification. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't angry, it was practical. Every time I looked back, it reopened something I was trying to close. Uncle David noticed the shift before I did. We met for coffee one afternoon, and he studied me over the rim of his mug with that quiet attentiveness he'd always had. "You're lighter," he said finally. "Still tired, but lighter." I laughed softly. "Is that a good thing?" "It's a real thing," he replied. "There's a difference." He never spoke badly about my parents. Not once. Even when he clearly disapproved of what they'd done, he framed it in terms of choices and consequences, not villains and victims. It forced me to sit with my own feelings instead of feeding them. I couldn't hide behind his anger because he didn't give me any. What he gave me was perspective. Around that time, I started going to a local community center that hosted workshops for freelancers and young professionals. I didn't expect much from it, but I was desperate to be around people who weren't tied to my past. People who didn't know my family, didn't know the story, didn't see me through the lens of what I'd lost. In those rooms, I met people who were rebuilding for all kinds of reasons: divorces, layoffs, family estrangements, health scares. Hearing their stories made mine feel less isolating. Pain, I realized, wasn't a personal failure. It was a shared human experience. That's where I met Marcus Reed. He wasn't flashy or loud, just quietly observant, with a dry sense of humor and an ease that made conversations feel unforced. He worked in marketing and had been coming to the workshops after leaving a long-term relationship that, by his own admission, had looked perfect on the outside and was quietly suffocating on the inside. We started talking during breaks, then collaborating on small projects, then staying late to finish work. Neither of us was in a rush to leave behind. One evening, after we wrapped up a project, he said something that caught me completely off guard. "You talk about your family like you're still waiting for them to come back and fix it." I froze, fingers hovering over my keyboard. "What do you mean?" He shrugged gently, not accusing, not smug. "Like part of you still expects a knock on the door. An apology. Something that resets everything." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He was right, and that truth sat heavy in my chest long after I went home that night. That realization hurt more than the accusation ever had, because it meant I wasn't just healing, I was holding on. Letting go didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some big decision I announced to myself in the mirror. It was quieter than that. I stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations with my parents. I stopped wondering what I'd say if they finally admitted they were wrong. I stopped imagining a version of the future where everything went back to how it used to be. Because the truth was, I didn't want how it used to be anymore. That version of me had survived by shrinking. My work picked up. Referrals led to better clients. Better clients led to steadier income. By the end of the year, I moved into a slightly larger apartment, still modest but bright clean and undeniably mine. I bought a second-hand couch, a few plants I somehow managed to keep alive, and framed a quote. Uncle David had once said to me, "You can't build peace on someone else's approval." I still thought about my family. That part never fully disappeared, but the thoughts no longer controlled me. They didn't dictate my mood or derail my day. They existed, and then they passed. I hadn't forgiven them, not yet, but I was no longer waiting for them either. And then, just as that new sense of balance began to settle, I came home one rainy evening to find an envelope slipped under my door. The handwriting on the front made my breath catch instantly. It was my mother's. I stood there for a long time, staring at the envelope like it might bite me if I touched it. The paper was slightly warped from the rain, the ink smudged in places, but I would have recognized my mother's handwriting anywhere. Careful. Deliberate. The kind that suggested she'd rewritten the address at least once before committing to it. For a moment I considered leaving it where it was, letting it dissolve into the floor unanswered. But curiosity and something older, deeper, won. I picked it up, locked the door behind me, and sat at the small kitchen table I'd bought secondhand. The room smelled faintly of coffee and damp air. Ordinary. Safe. I needed that contrast before opening it. The first line made my stomach tighten. "We need to talk about your uncle." Not about us, not about what happened, about Uncle David. I read the letter slowly once, then again. My mother's tone was polite, restrained, almost formal. She wrote about confusion, about how David had suddenly stopped speaking to them, about how my father was under pressure, how Chloe was struggling without financial support, how things were harder than expected. She said she didn't understand what had happened between me and David, but surely as family I could help smooth things over. "Please don't turn your back on us," she wrote near the end. "We're still your family." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the accusation, no recognition of the way they'd thrown me out without a second thought. Just a request, carefully wrapped in concern that I fix the problem they were facing. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not heartbreak, not even anger. Clarity. They didn't miss me. They missed what they were losing. I folded the letter neatly and set it on the table, staring at it as if it were a document from another life. Memories surfaced, uninvited birthdays where Chloe unwrapped expensive gifts while I smiled and said thank you for something practical. Arguments where I was told to be understanding. Nights where I convinced myself that love meant endurance. I saw the pattern clearly now, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That evening, I called Uncle David. He answered on the second ring. "Mary," he said warmly, "good to hear from you." "I got a letter from my mom," I said without preamble. There was a pause, not surprise recognition. I wondered when that would happen. "She says you stopped speaking to them, that they don't understand why." A soft, humorless chuckle. "Of course she does." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting heavy in my chest. "How bad is it for them?" He exhaled slowly. "Your father took out a loan to cover the mortgage. Chloe's tuition went unpaid for 2 months before she took a leave of absence. Your mother's still trying to keep up appearances, but the cracks are showing." "And you're okay with that?" I asked. "I'm not enjoying their pain," he said carefully, "but I'm done rewarding behavior that hurts people. Sometimes consequences are the only language left." That should have been enough. Enough justice, enough closure. But my mind wouldn't settle. For the first time, I didn't want to just let things happen quietly. I didn't want the truth to remain something only a few of us knew. I wanted it undeniable. Not loud, not cruel, just clear. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything. The accusation, Chloe's smug certainty, my parents' refusal to listen. I realized something unsettling. My family didn't believe in truth unless it came wrapped in embarrassment, unless it threatened their image. That was the only thing that ever moved them. And for the first time, I understood what I needed to do. The plan didn't form all at once. It began as a thought, then a series of questions, then a shape I couldn't ignore. I wasn't out to destroy them. I didn't want screaming matches or public meltdowns. I wanted accountability. I wanted the truth to stand where lies had been allowed to flourish. The first step was information. Over the next few weeks, I met Uncle David often. Sometimes at the old diner he loved, sometimes at his office. I told him I wanted to help with some of his business projects to learn more about how things worked. That wasn't a lie. But it also gave me access to something else records, years worth of them. As we organized files together, the scope of his generosity became undeniable. Mortgage payments, tuition transfers, emergency loans that were never repaid, notes scribbled in the margins. Cover car payment again. Sandra says roof repair, no invoice yet. They hadn't just leaned on him. They had built their entire stability on his silence. One night, I spread the documents across my living room floor, the weight of them pressing in from every direction. This was the truth in black and white. But truth alone wasn't enough. It had to be seen. It had to be witnessed. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Chloe posted an announcement online, a birthday dinner for herself at an upscale restaurant downtown. A celebration of resilience, gratitude, support. My parents were tagged in every photo, smiling like nothing had ever happened. I knew they couldn't afford it. And in that moment, the final piece fell into place. I called Uncle David the next morning. I need your help, I said, with what he asked. Setting the record straight, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me what you're thinking." By the time I finished explaining, there was no hesitation in his voice. "I won't stop you," he said, "but make sure this is about closure, not revenge." "I think it's both," I admitted. He smiled softly. Fair enough. By the time Chloe's birthday approached, everything was ready, and my family had no idea what was waiting for them. By the time Chloe's birthday dinner approached, I felt strangely calm, not numb, clear. The kind of clarity that only comes after you've already mourned something and realize there's nothing left to lose. This wasn't about anger anymore. It wasn't even about justice in the dramatic sense. It was about truth placed carefully where it could no longer be ignored. Over the next few weeks, Uncle David and I worked quietly. There were no secretive late-night meetings or whispered conspiracies, just methodical preparation. He trusted me completely, and for the first time in my life, that trust felt like something solid I could stand on, rather than something I had to earn by staying quiet. We organized everything. Every tuition payment he had made for Chloe, every mortgage transfer, every emergency loan my parents had requested over the years, car repairs, business setbacks, sudden medical scares that somehow never produced invoices. It was all there neatly documented, stretching back farther than I'd expected. Decades of generosity that had been absorbed into my parents' lives, as if it were an entitlement rather than a gift. What struck me most wasn't the amount of money, though it was staggering. It was the pattern, the consistency, the way my parents had grown comfortable leaning on him while presenting themselves as self-made, independent, successful. They hadn't just accepted help, they'd built their identity on it. Truth like that doesn't need embellishment. It speaks for itself. As the dinner date drew closer, I reached out to a few people I knew would be there. Family friends, longtime neighbors, church acquaintances who'd always praised my parents' strength and values. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't hint at anything scandalous. I asked harmless questions framed as catching up. "Oh, you know," one woman said warmly. "Your parents are so lucky to have David. He's been such a blessing to them over the years." "A blessing?" I asked casually. "In what way?" She laughed. "Oh, honey, everything. The mortgage, Chloe's school, even that business loan your father took years ago. David's practically family." That was all I needed. Confirmation that the truth wasn't hidden, it had simply been ignored when it became inconvenient. Meanwhile, Chloe's posts grew more extravagant as the dinner approached. Photos of the restaurant, hints about champagne, captions about gratitude and moving forward. My parents commented on every post, hearts and praises lining up neatly beneath the illusion they were desperate to maintain. I didn't feel rage when I saw them. I felt resolve. The plan itself was simple. There would be no confrontation, no yelling, no dramatic entrance from me. Uncle David would attend not as a guest, but as himself, calm, respected, impossible to dismiss. He would speak when the moment was right, armed, not with accusations, but with facts. I would be nearby, not hidden, not lurking, just present enough to witness the truth unfold. I didn't need to say much. I'd already said everything that mattered. A few nights before the dinner, Uncle David called me. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I am," I said without hesitation. And I was. Because readiness, I'd learned, doesn't come from confidence, it comes from acceptance. He sighed softly. "I'll help you. But remember, once this happens, there's no putting things back the way they were." "I don't want to," I replied. On the morning of Chloe's birthday, I woke up early and went for a long walk. The city was quiet, the air cool, the sky overcast. I thought about the girl I'd been before all of this, the one who believed that loyalty meant silence, that love meant endurance. I felt compassion for her, and gratitude that I was no longer her. That evening I dressed simply, nothing flashy, nothing symbolic, just myself as I was now. As I headed downtown, the restaurant's lights glowing in the distance, I felt no urge to rush, no tremor of doubt. The truth was already in motion. All that remained was to let it arrive. What happened next wouldn't just expose my family's lies. It would finally close a chapter I'd been trapped in my entire life. By the time Chloe's birthday dinner began, I was already there close enough to observe, far enough not to disrupt. The restaurant was exactly what I expected: dim lighting. Soft piano music, polished wood surfaces that reflected the illusion of elegance my parents loved so much. Everything about the setting was designed to feel important, curated, worthy of being seen. My parents arrived first. My mother walked in with her practiced smile, shoulders back, posture perfect. My father followed closely, scanning the room as if measuring who might be watching. Chloe came last, glowing with confidence, dressed for attention, already playing the role of the resilient survivor surrounded by love. They looked untouchable. Uncle David arrived quietly. No announcement, no flourish. Just his presence, calm, steady, unmistakable. He greeted a few familiar faces with polite nods, exchanged brief pleasantries, and took his seat. No one questioned why he was there. They never did. His reputation spoke for itself. I watched as the evening unfolded. Champagne poured, toasts were made. Chloe smiled and laughed, soaking in the admiration. My parents basked in the reflected glow, proud and relieved, convinced they'd weathered the storm. Then, at exactly the right moment, Uncle David stood. The shift was immediate. Conversations stalled. Heads turned. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried measured, clear, impossible to ignore. "I hope everyone's enjoying the evening," he began. "There's something I need to clarify." My mother's smile froze. My father stiffened. Chloe's grip tightened on her glass. "For many years," David continued, "I've provided financial support to this family. Quietly, consistently. Mortgage payments, tuition, emergency assistance. I did it because I believed in helping family when they needed it." A murmur rippled through the room. "But support requires trust," he said. "And when trust is broken, silence becomes complicity. I won't participate in that." He gestured calmly, and a discreet screen behind him lit up. Numbers, dates, transactions. Every payment documented, every transfer accounted for. The evidence wasn't emotional, it was factual. Brutally so. My father's face drained of color. My mother reached for her glass, her hand trembling. Chloe stared at the screen, her expression collapsing in real time. "I've stopped all financial support," David said evenly. "Not out of cruelty, but out of principle. Lies have consequences." Someone whispered. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their chair. "This is a misunderstanding," my father stammered. David looked at him steadily. "No, this is clarity." Chloe's eyes scanned the room, searching for reassurance for allies. They found none. When her gaze finally landed on me, recognition flashed, followed by fear. "You knew," she whispered. "I always did," I said quietly. That was all I needed to say. There was no argument to be won, no defense left to mount. The truth had already done its work. My parents sat in stunned silence, their carefully constructed image dismantled, without a single raised voice. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath. I walked out into the cool night air, my breath steady, my steps unhurried. For the first time, I wasn't leaving because I'd been forced out. I was leaving because I chose to. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread quietly. Chloe took responsibility for her tuition. My parents were forced to confront a life without the safety net they'd depended on for years. There were no apologies sent my way, no attempts at reconciliation, and for once, that didn't matter. My life continued forward. My business grew. My friendships deepened. My sense of self, once tied to approval I'd never truly had, finally stood on its own. Uncle David and I remained close, but now as equals, not benefactor and beneficiary, just family bound by honesty. One evening, I sat on my balcony, city lights flickering below. The air was cool, quiet, peaceful. My phone buzzed with a message from a client. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic. I smiled, because I finally understood something I'd spent years chasing without realizing it. Justice doesn't always come with shouting. Victory doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like walking away whole while the truth stands behind you undeniable.